I am 80 years old. That's the age they decided my voice expired. They didn't ask me what I wanted anymore. They discussed me instead, across the table, over my head, with the kind of patience people reserve for furniture that has stopped matching the room. "She won't notice," my son said once, not quietly enough. "At her age, she won't understand," my daughter added. At my age, I sat there, hands folded in my lap, listening to my life being summarized as an inconvenience. It started with small things. They spoke for me at appointments, answered questions before I opened my mouth, corrected my memories in front of others. "No, Mom, that's not how it happened. You're confused. Let me explain." They smiled when they said it. That was the cruelest part. Then came the bigger decisions: the house, the accounts, the future. They discussed timelines with careful neutrality, how long things might take, what should be sold first, who would handle what when the time came. When the time came. As if I were already gone. I remember the moment it became clear. We were at dinner. My daughter had brought documents in a neat folder. "Just formalities," she said. "Nothing changes." I glanced at the pages. Power of attorney, medical authority, financial control. Everything changed. "I'd like to read this," I said. They exchanged looks. My son sighed. "Mom, you don't need to stress yourself." "I'm not stressed," I replied. "I'm reading." My daughter smiled tightly. "You trust us, don't you?" Trust. The word people use when they want silence. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the house settle, thinking of all the years I had spent building it, brick by brick, meal by meal, sacrifice by sacrifice. They thought age had erased my memory. They were wrong. Age had sharpened it. The next morning, I called my friend Eleanor. We've known each other since we were girls with borrowed dresses and big plans. "They think I won't object," I told her. She laughed softly. "Then object." "I will," I said. "Just not the way they expect. Because when people underestimate you, they give you something priceless: time. And I was about to use every bit of it. Once they decided I was no longer a participant, they stopped whispering. It happened gradually. At first, they used careful language. "When the house is eventually sold, later on, we'll need to simplify things." Eventually became soon. Soon became assumed. One afternoon, my son stood in the living room with his phone out taking photos. "For the records," he said. "What records?" I asked. He smiled, indulgent, just in case. In case of what? We both knew. My daughter reorganized my kitchen. She moved things without asking. "You won't need these," she said, setting aside dishes I'd used for 40 years. I watched silently. People reveal their plans when they think you're too tired to notice. They spoke openly about inheritance now. Not cruelly, practically. "Split 3 ways," my son said once. "The jewelry should be appraised," my daughter replied. "We'll need to close some accounts quickly." I sat in my chair and knitted. The clicking of needles kept me from smiling. They assumed my silence was agreement. That's a common mistake. That evening, Eleanor came over. She took in the scene with one glance: the half-packed shelves, the missing photographs, the quiet disrespect humming through the house. "They're getting bold," she said later, when we sat alone with tea. "Yes," I replied. "That means they're careless." Eleanor's children had passed years ago, a car accident. She had never spoken of it without pain. But she had built a life of her own since, steady, kind, resilient. She understood loss and loyalty. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I'm thinking," I said slowly, "that they don't see me as alive anymore." She nodded. "Then they won't see what you change." The next day, my daughter asked if I remembered where I kept my will. I looked at her and smiled. "Of course," I said. That was a lie. I had already moved it. Because when people start counting what isn't theirs, the wisest thing you can do is change the numbers. I became exactly who they expected. That was my advantage. I asked the same questions twice. I forgot where I'd put my glasses. I nodded when they corrected me. "See?" my son said once, kindly patronizing. "This is why we're helping." Helping. They loved that word. I let my daughter manage my appointments. She spoke for me, over me, around me. She gets confused, she told the nurse. I smiled at the nurse and said nothing. Confusion, it turned out, was very useful. They brought more papers, forms with sticky notes, highlighted lines, places where my signature was expected. Just routine, my daughter said. Nothing changes, my son added. I signed slowly, carefully. Not those papers, others. Eleanor and I met twice a week. We didn't talk about my children much. We talked about logistics, lawyers, accounts, timelines. She listened without interrupting. Are you sure? She asked only once. I've never been more sure, I replied. At home, my children grew bolder. My son replaced the locks for safety. My daughter boxed up my books. They discussed selling the house before the year was out. I thanked them. Gratitude disarms people who expect fear. One evening, I heard my daughter on the phone. She won't argue, she said. She's too old. I paused in the hallway. Too old. I had lived long enough to know what that really meant. They thought time had weakened me. They didn't understand. It had taught me patience. That night, Eleanor held my hand. You don't have to do this, she said softly. I do, I replied. For myself. She squeezed my fingers. Then I'm with you. Because the cruelest mistake people make is assuming kindness disappears with age. It doesn't. It just becomes selective. They moved faster after that. People always do when they think the finish line is close. My son brought a lawyer to the house. Not my lawyer. The family lawyer, he said, placing emphasis on the word family like it was a leash. The man spoke slowly, loudly, as if volume could replace respect. At your age, he said, smiling too much. These arrangements bring peace of mind. Peace, another word people use when they want compliance. They laid the documents out on the dining table. My table. Medical authority, financial authority, living arrangements options. They had already chosen the options. You won't have to worry anymore, my daughter said, patting my hand. I looked at her fingers resting on mine. So familiar. So entitled. I worry less every day, I said. She smiled, relieved. What they didn't know was that a week earlier, I had already signed a new will, not at the house, not with anyone they knew. A quiet office, 2 witnesses, a steady pen. Eleanor sat beside me that day, not as my friend, as my family. The lawyer asked gently, "Are you certain?" I met his eyes. I am 80 years old, I said. That's old enough to know exactly what I'm doing. He nodded and sealed it. Back at home, my children toasted with wine. To taking care of Mom, my son said. I raised my glass. To planning carefully, I replied. They laughed. They began discussing renovations. Who would move in? Who would sell what? Who deserved more for everything they'd done? I listened, silently, memorizing every word. That night, Eleanor called. It's done, she said. Yes, I replied. Now we wait, because the most effective revenge isn't loud. It's patient, and it lets people finish their plans before it erases them. They started talking about my health as if it were a schedule. She's getting weaker, my daughter said one morning, loud enough for me to hear from the hallway. She won't last long in this house, my son replied. We should be ready. Ready, always that word. They booked appointments I hadn't asked for. Specialists, assessments, evaluations. Every visit ended the same way, with my children answering questions meant for me. She's confused. She forgets things. We're concerned. Concern is powerful when it's rehearsed. One doctor looked at me longer than the others. Do you feel confused? She asked. No, I said calmly. I feel managed. My daughter laughed nervously. The doctor didn't. At home, the atmosphere changed. They spoke softer now, moved slower around me, treated me like glass. It wasn't kindness, it was positioning. One evening, my son sat across from me and said what they had been circling for weeks. We think it's time to move you somewhere safer. Somewhere smaller. Somewhere controlled. somewhere temporary that would become permanent. I like it here, I said. He sighed. Mom, please don't be difficult. Difficult. That word means uncooperative when you're old. That night, I packed a small bag, not to leave, to be ready. Eleanor had taught me that. Never let them rush you, she'd said. And never let them surprise you. The next morning, my daughter handed me a brochure. A facility with soft colors and locked doors. Just until we sort things out, she said. I smiled. How thoughtful, I replied. She relaxed. That was the moment I knew they were close to their mistake. Because people who believe you're powerless stop hiding their hands. Later that day, Eleanor came by. I barely acknowledged her. She's just a friend, my son said dismissively. I watched Eleanor's face. Calm, unreadable, perfect. Over tea, Eleanor leaned close and whispered, "They're pushing." Yes, I replied. That means we're ready. Because when someone uses your age against you, they forget one thing. Age means experience. And experience knows when the final move is coming. They chose a Friday. People always do when they want things done quietly. Boxes appeared in the hallway that morning. Not mine. Empty ones, waiting. My daughter stood by the door with her coat on, keys already in her hand. We're just going to look, she said. No pressure. My son avoided my eyes. Pressure doesn't need to announce itself. A van pulled up outside. Not a taxi. A service. 2 men stepped out. Polite, efficient, already briefed. My heart didn't race. It settled. This was the moment Eleanor and I had prepared for. I'm not going anywhere today, I said. My daughter smiled tightly. Mom, please don't make this hard. Hard. As if being removed from your life were an inconvenience to others. My son stepped closer. You can't live alone anymore. We've decided. I looked at him. You decided, I corrected. I didn't. He opened his mouth to argue. Eleanor's voice cut through the room. Then you'll need to leave. They turned, startled. They had forgotten she existed. She held up a folder. Not dramatic, not rushed, just certain. Any attempt to move her without consent will be documented, she said, and reported. My daughter laughed nervously. You don't have authority. Eleanor smiled. Actually, she said, I do. She placed the documents on the table. Medical directive, legal authority, witness signatures. My authority. Granted by me. The men from the van shifted uncomfortably. One cleared his throat. Will step outside. They left. The door closed. Silence rushed in. My son's face drained of color. When did you? Before you decided I couldn't, I replied. My daughter's voice shook. You went behind our backs. No, I said. I went in front of my future. They argued then. Voices raised. Accusations thrown. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The power had already moved. Finally, my son said the thing he had been holding back for months. You're doing this to punish us. I met his eyes. I'm doing this because you tried to erase me, I said. They left soon after. Not defeated, exposed. Eleanor stayed. We sat at the table where they had planned my ending. She poured tea. Well, she said lightly, that didn't go how they expected. I laughed. For the first time in weeks, because once people realize you're not as helpless as they thought, they start to worry about what else they got wrong. They didn't wait long. Fear has a way of speeding people up. My son called first. Too polite, too careful. We should talk, he said. Just us. No, I replied. We should talk honestly. There's a difference. He hung up. My daughter tried a softer approach. She arrived with flowers the next day. My favorites. I brought these for you, she said, placing them on the table like an offering. I didn't touch them. Sit, I said. She did. We're worried, she began. You've been influenced. By whom? I asked. She hesitated. By Eleanor. I smiled. That's interesting, I said. You never worried about influence when you were planning my life without me. Her jaw tightened. That afternoon, they requested a meeting. Not at my house, at a lawyer's office. Neutral ground again. They liked neutral ground when they thought it favored them. The lawyer was young, polished, confident. He spoke about family harmony, about avoiding conflict, about making sure everyone felt secure. Secure, not me, them. Your children are concerned about your will, he said, folding his hands. There have been changes. Yes, I replied, there have. My son leaned forward. We just want to understand. No, I said calmly. You want to stop it. The lawyer clearing his throat. Perhaps a compromise. There will be none, I said. A room went quiet. They weren't used to that tone from me. My daughter's voice cracked. You can't leave everything to Eleanor's children. They're not even your family. I looked at her for a long moment. They visited me, I said. They listened. They never waited for me to disappear. Silence again. My son stood up abruptly. This is cruel, he said. After everything we've done. I nodded slowly. Yes, I said. You did do everything. The lawyer glanced between us, uneasy now. I need to remind everyone, he said carefully, that your mother is fully competent. That word, competent. It sounded different when it worked against them. They left angry, not loud. Controlled anger is more dangerous. That night, Eleanor and I reviewed everything one last time. The will, the letters, the instructions, all clear, all final. Are you afraid? She asked. No, I replied. I'm finished pretending. Because when people decide you're too old to object, they never imagine the moment you stop explaining. And explanation was the last thing they were ever going to get. When private pressure failed, they went public. That was predictable. My phone started ringing with unfamiliar numbers. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years suddenly checking in. Old friends asking if I was all right. A neighbor mentioning, too casually, that my children were very concerned. Concern travels fast when it needs witnesses. My daughter posted photos online, old ones, me smiling at birthdays, holding grandchildren, looking soft, harmless. The caption read, "Family is everything, cherish them while you can." People commented with hearts. They didn't know the context. That was the quote. At church, whispers followed me down the aisle. Isn't she the one? I heard she's being manipulated. Poor thing, at her age. At her age. They loved that phrase. It did the work for them. I sat through it all without correcting anyone. Silence, when chosen, is not weakness. It's timing. Eleanor's children came to visit that weekend. 2 adults. Calm. Respectful. They brought groceries. They asked how I was feeling. Not what I planned to do. Not who would get what. Just how I felt. My son saw them leaving my house. I know, because he called minutes later. You're embarrassing us, he hissed. People are talking. Yes, I replied. They finally are. He showed up that evening, angry now. This isn't how families behave, he said. I looked at him carefully. You decided I was too old to object, I said. You don't get to decide how I respond. The next day, I did something they never expected. I spoke. Not online, not in anger, in writing. I sent a letter to the relatives who mattered. Short, clear, calm. I am well. I am capable. I made my decisions knowingly. Any suggestion otherwise is untrue. No accusations, no explanations, just truth. The calls slowed. The whispers changed direction. People tend to retreat when certainty enters the room. My daughter came by one last time. No flowers, no folder, just frustration. You're turning everyone against us, she said. I shook my head. No, I replied. You did that when you decided my age meant my consent. She looked at me then, not as a child looks at a parent, but as a stranger, realizing she never knew the rules of the room. That night, I slept peacefully. Because once you stop being ashamed of defending yourself, public pressure loses its teeth. And my children were running out of tools. I didn't call a meeting. I didn't warn them. I let the truth arrive the way it should. Formally, clearly, without a motion to argue with. My lawyer sent the notices on a Monday morning. Certified, documented, unavoidable. My children received them within hours of each other. I know because my phone lit up like it used to when they needed money. This time, I didn't answer. The letter was simple. It stated that my will had been updated, that all assets had been reassigned, that no further discussion was required. Attached was something else, a personal letter from me. I wrote it slowly over several nights, not to accuse, to record. You decided my age meant my silence. You decided my life was already finished. You spoke for me, planned for me, and moved me like furniture. So I made one final decision on my own. What I built will go to those who treated me as present, not convenient. This is not punishment. It is consequence. No anger, no threats, just clarity. My son came to the house that evening, not angry, shaken. "You can't do this," he said, standing in the doorway like a man who had misread the map. "I already did," I replied. My daughter followed an hour later. She didn't sit, she paced. "Eleanor's children," she said. "Strangers?" "They are not strangers to me," I replied. "They never treated me like I was already gone." "You're erasing us," she said, her voice breaking. I looked at her carefully. "No," I said. "I'm stopping you from erasing me." She sank into a chair. For the first time, she looked small, not powerless, accountable. "You raised us," she whispered. "You owe us." I held up my hand. "I gave you my youth," I said. "My labor, my love, I do not owe you my silence." They left separately. Neither said goodbye. That was fine. Goodbyes are for endings you agree on. That night, Eleanor came over. We sat in the kitchen where my children had once spread out their plans. "It's done," she said softly. "Yes," I replied. "Now it can finish, because once the truth is written down, it no longer belongs to interpretation. It belongs to the record. They didn't come back together." That told me everything. My son sent a message first. Short, controlled. "I hope you know what you're doing." I read it once and set the phone down. I did know. I had known the moment they decided my age meant consent. My daughter didn't write at all. She sent her husband instead. He stood in my doorway, hands clasped. Eyes careful. "She's devastated," he said. "This will follow her forever." I nodded. "So will what you all tried to do to me." He had no reply. Weeks passed. The noise faded. People adjusted, just as they always do when the outcome doesn't bend. Eleanor's children visited more often. They never spoke about the will, unless I did. They brought soup, fixed a loose step, sat and listened to stories I hadn't told in years. Presence without agenda is a rare gift. I gave them mine. One afternoon, Eleanor and I sat on the porch, watching light move across the garden. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "No," I said. "I regret that they forced me to choose." She nodded. "You chose yourself." "Yes," I replied, at 80. We laughed. I updated my instructions one last time. Clear language, no loopholes. Letters sealed for the right time, not out of spite, out of peace. People still say things. She's stubborn, she's confused. At her age, I let them. Age no longer needed defending. Because here's the truth they never learned. Being old doesn't make you weak. It makes you precise. You stop wasting words. You stop bargaining with disrespect. You stop living as an afterthought in your own life. They thought I was too old to object. So I objected, quietly, legally, permanently. I didn't raise my voice. I raised my standards. And when the time comes, what I built will go to those who never waited for me to disappear. That is my revenge. That is my peace.